Welcome back to another episode of Indie Author Blueprint. This is a podcast that I like to cut straight to the content on. You notice there's no introductory music. There's no trailer that begins. We're just cutting right into the practical stuff. But I do want to tell you one thing, that if you are looking for show notes, if you're looking for any extra content that goes along with all of the audio, it's at Substack. And you're going to just need to look for Indie Author Blueprint, and you'll find all the bonuses I talk about and a lot more than just what I say on the audio. So be sure to go there and you'll have all the stuff you need. All right, let's talk about today's topic. I've talked for 2 episodes about interior formatting, and this is for whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're hiring somebody. It's important to know some of those terms. But I want to go even deeper in this final episode in that little mini series on that before we continue with talking about publishing. I've talked about covers and interiors, and I want to talk about the publishing standards of those covers and interiors. Essentially, what you need to know about the file itself. Because this is different from designing on Canva. This is different from designing something you're going to print on your home computer, and there's a reason for that. It's going to be printed on a commercial printer, and a lot of what we do at home is made for us to use that home printer. It's also made to be viewed on screens, and this is for commercial printing. So you have to know a little bit about what somebody who creates flyers and brochures and all of that kind of stuff needs to know. So whether you hire someone else or whether you're going to do it, you need to know a few things. I've worked with a few authors who get stuck here. And some of it's because they're working on it, and some of it's because they're working together with somebody else, and that person doesn't exactly know because they're really great at working with the software, but really don't know how to export the document in a way that it works. Some of the technical terminology throws them off because it's really related to commercial printing and design. So someone who's in photography or commercial design might be familiar with some of the terms, but it's not something the everyday person talks about. And frankly, if you're interested in words, you're not really interested in the technical specs of publishing and exporting a document. I'm a little bit nerdy that way because I like that stuff, because I'm into the design aspect and the writing. But it's really unusual for someone to care about all of those things, to care about the writing, to care about the design, and to care about the specifications for publishing. That's why there's a few of us who do that, and that's why there are publishing houses that have teams of people that work together. But if you're an indie author, it's probably just you, and it's a little scary. So we're going to get into some technical things in this discussion. It might be overwhelming, and if it gets to that point, just tune it out. Just turn it off and move on to a different topic, because maybe you have this covered, or maybe you want to share it with somebody who's working with you and just tell them, listen to this, because I don't know what it's talking about, but I really need you to know this information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an overview here on the podcast. And then for paid subscribers, they will have access to a very detailed article that explains more about prepping files. And there will also be a bonus checklist to run through. You can print that out, run it through to see if you've covered all the bases when it comes to prepping a file. So we're going to talk today about prepping a book file for publishing. So this is important because it's critical for a smooth publishing process. That's why I'm talking about it right now, because sometimes people want to brush over this and then they don't realize that this is really important, because you could write the book, design the book, and if you can't get it on the platform to get it published, it's really frustrating. So by the end of the episode, I hope that you feel confident about preparing your files for upload, or you know what questions you need to ask somebody. The first thing we're going to talk about is some key technical terms and what they mean. Now, I've talked about these briefly in some other episodes, so a couple of things I'm going to brush over a little bit, but I'm going to review here so you have it all in one place. So let's talk about trim size. This is the final dimensions of the book after it's printed. So this is what size it is if you were to pull it directly off the bookshelf. So standard size like 6x9 is really common. 5.5 by 8.5 is really common. 8.5 by 11 for a workbook. That is the finished size. Now, you always want to confirm with your printing platform, with your KDP or IngramSpark or wherever you're going, to see if they carry that size. They're all going to carry 6x9. They're all going to carry 5.5 by 8.5. But if you have a strange size, compare, because I recently had to do this and they do not have all the same sizes on both platforms. There are some custom options. I'm just trying that out right now, so I'll keep you posted on whether that works on a book that I'm working on. The other technical term that I have talked about and will review here is bleed. And this is different for your cover and your pages. But a bleed is the extra space around the edges of your design file that will ensure that there are no white edges after trimming. So it's going to get trimmed away. It's generally 1/8 of an inch. It's 0.125. So 0.125 inches. And like I said, it's different for the cover. On the cover, it goes all the way around. So you need to add 0.125 to the top, bottom, and sides and add that in, so your full dimensions of your file is going to include the front, the back, the spine, and the bleed. That is going to be the final dimension of the book file that you're going to send. It's going to be one PDF file with all those pieces, kind of like if you were to open the book up and smush it down, face down. That's what you're going to see. On the interior pages, it's a little different. It's usually added to the top and to the outsides. And this is typical for KDP and IngramSpark, but I do know that there's some like Lulu and some other ones that want it all the way around. So you just have to go and read their publishing specs, because they will tell you what they want. And if they want it, do it, because you're going to get a better product. And when you're setting up your pages, they have to be set up in spreads for a print book. That means they're facing pages so that they're mirror images of each other in that 2-page spread. And so that means the outside on the right-hand side and the outside on the left are not exactly the same. So if you're adding on bleed, make sure that you're taking into account that the left and the right should be mirror images of each other. All right, you'll see some diagrams of that when you're going and looking on platforms on how to set up a document as well. The other thing you need to think about is DPI, which is dots per inch, and your resolution of your photos all need to be 300. A lot of the ones on our screens, even the ones I take with my iPhone, are 72 DPI, and that is not enough for print. And if you take a really tiny little image and you blow it up big, it's going to be blurry and pixelated and all of that. And their checkers at the publishing platform can tell when they run your file through if you have some images in there that should not be there. And so instead of getting it kicked back, you want to just start out with them correctly. And in the show notes that is for paid subscribers, I will give some extra tips on how to check this. How do you know what the resolution is? And then you'll be able to use software for fixing that. And if you don't know how, you'll have to ask somebody who's familiar with that software to help you convert your images so that they are full size. And if they're really tiny to begin with, like some of the things you see on the internet, you're just not going to be able to convert them, and you might have to get a different photo. Remember, most books are done in black and white, so your photos are probably black and white, and so you're going to convert those into a grayscale as well. So speaking of grayscale, let's talk about color. If you are doing a traditional, I don't mean traditionally published, but just a standard paperback, let's say a novel, this is going to be done in grayscale. It's not a color document. And so all the photos and everything you have in there needs to be converted into black and white or grayscale. And so it gets submitted that way, and only the cover is in color. But that still means those images have to start out at the high resolution I was talking about. So there are two different color formats, and one is for your screens and one is for printing. Printing uses CMYK, which is a 4-color process, and it means the C stands for cyan, M for magenta, Y for yellow, and K is black. So you have these 4 colors that make up everything. Like essentially everything in an image you have is 4 colors. And the screen color is 3 colors, and that is RGB. That's red, green, and blue. And you'll notice the black is missing from there. And in order to make black for a screen, it's actually an oversaturation of all of those colors together. Whereas in that 4 color, we have the colors, the cyan, the magenta, the yellow, and then there's a black, and it can be added in different percentages. If you're starting out with RGB, let's imagine that you created an illustration or something on an iPad and you used a little, there's all kinds of different software for drawing, and then you exported it and you put it in your book. Well, most of those programs are designed to make the 3-color, and you're going to have to use something like Photoshop or professional software to convert it into the 4-color, because you need to have it in the 4-color and the high resolution. So I'll tell you that I ran into an issue with a client recently where I was just helping with coaching for upload, and the file was actually created by her illustrator, and those illustrations were done in software that I believe had RGB. We couldn't figure out until later. I figured out where the issue probably was. And what happens is when you have those 3 colors and you're trying to make a good rich black color for like anything in the illustration, you will add, let's say somebody uses 100% red, 100% blue, and 100% yellow to get this really good dark shade of black. Well, that's a saturation added together of 300%. And once it's converted into the 4-color, which I know I'm getting into some really technical stuff here, but when it's converted into that, it can result in this oversaturated color. And the conversion doesn't know quite what to do with these two differences of color. And what happens with publishing platforms like IngramSpark is they only allow a 240% saturation. So if you have an illustration that you or somebody else created and it has 300%, you're going to run into issues, especially if you're doing color printing on the inside, say a children's book. It might not be an issue with the cover so much, but it's an issue on the inside. They have to use a different kind of premium paper because the paper curls and wrinkles when it's so saturated with color. I'm giving you all of that so that you're aware when you're starting out that you need to understand color formulas, because it really does affect the outcome. It affects the frustration of how long you have to wait to get it, you're tweaking and someone's helping you and getting it to the right thing so you can actually see your book on a shelf. Now, in the show notes for paid subscribers, I am going to give you a couple of tips on how to check for the color mode and how to convert it in order to get to the thing that you need. And those color shifts are always going to cause a slight change, so you do want to proof that and see if they match how you want it to look. The blues and the greens and everything might be a little different when you go from the 3 to the 4. The last thing that you want to know in the technical aspect of getting that file all set up and doing it the right way is that you want to make sure that the fonts are embedded in the file. Now, this means that the fonts are included in the PDF file so that when you send it to somebody else and they open it, it appears as intended and the missing fonts are not substituted with generic ones, which can look really different from how you planned on your book looking. Now, on a regular PDF of, say, a black and white novel, this really isn't a big deal on the inside, so you're going to export it in a way that it will kind of flatten it automatically, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when you're thinking about the cover, this is where it's really important. When you either outline the fonts, that's something that you can do, or you will embed them, and I'll get to that when we move forward in a second here and talk about that exporting process and what you need to do. And the only reason I'm bringing it up here is because it's important, because you want your fonts to look exactly the way that you designed it. Okay, so then let's go ahead and move on to prepping that file. So when you export it, you want to keep the bleed on there when you're exporting your file. So if you set it up, don't export it and accidentally forget to check the box that you want to keep the bleed on there. And I talked about it in another episode, but you want to check to make sure that you've got the margins looking right when you export it, the gutter, that area in the inside binding where the crease is, that your text isn't tucked right in there so you can't read it. And so you want to make sure that after you export it, that when you look at a spread, it looks right and things aren't all off. And you'll have another chance when you upload it to your publishing platform to see if it looks right on their previewer as well. So here's where we get to the flattening or the outlining of text. Usually there's a button when you're exporting that will allow you to embed those fonts. And that happens when I'm doing the interior. But when I'm doing the cover, I want to make sure that all the layers are simplified for printing, because if I've put some gradient color over something or faded out something else, they can look really wonky if you don't get that flattened out. So what I do is I export the cover file into a PDF when I'm done, and then I take it into Photoshop and I flatten it all in Photoshop and then save it again. And when I do that, it means that I didn't ruin or modify the working document. I've just flattened out the final. And this is why it's important. If you decide you have to go back and make a change to, say, a title, you don't want all your fonts and all your text outlined, because once you outline it, it's no longer able for you to edit it and like type the text anymore. It essentially takes all of the text and it turns it into little images. And so I like to do that on a new separate file just in case I want to tweak something later. So there are print production processes you can do after it's done also. If you don't have Photoshop, one of the things I have done with some commercial print products is I've taken them into Adobe Acrobat Pro and I've outlined the fonts there and then saved a copy of it. There are different ways that you can do it, but just make sure that you have converted all of the text into shapes so that they don't need the font files for your cover. It's making that cover into one big image. Now, as you're exporting then, there are some settings that you use. And one of the things we use for commercial printing is a export setting that is a document that's a PDF/X1A. These are standard print PDFs. And the reason that we do it this way is it's specifically for high quality, reliable printing, and it ensures that all the necessary elements like the fonts, the images, and the color profiles are all embedded or they're flattened. And this ensures the best compatibility when you send a file to somebody else. It essentially makes certain parts of it not editable so that what you see is what you get. And when I'm sending it to KDP and IngramSpark, that's what I do. When I am exporting from, I'm using Adobe software, InDesign or Illustrator, when I'm exporting from there on my interior file or my cover file, I'm choosing a PDF X1A. If that's totally outside of, like, I just went kaboom, that was outside of what you normally think about, that's okay. Just tell somebody, tell the person who's helping you, that's what you need. Printers prefer it because it's simple. It doesn't lead to some errors with those layers that has like the shading and gradients. It assures a better color accuracy. And like I said, it puts the fonts in there so the text is how it's supposed to be. And commercial printers just know what to do with it. Okay, so moving on to a couple more things. Crop marks and safe zones. Crop marks are little marks on the corners that indicate where a page will be trimmed. And that's something that when I'm doing a proof or a draft, I often put that there so I can see like, oh, that's where the edge is going to be. Because if you print that out on a white piece of paper, you can't tell like, well, what is actually my page size here? So I will put that on my proofs so that I can see what they are. But most of the printers that I work with, like KDP, IngramSpark, they do not want to have crop marks on the final document you send to them. They just know that if you added bleed, it's there and they will trim it away. They're not going to want to see the trimming marks. Now, if I create a postcard for a printer or business card or something, they want the crop marks on there because they're trimming my business card and they have a machine that does it, but it's very different with printing a book. The other thing then is a safe zone. And this is something where you want to keep the elements like your text, especially at least a 1/4 inch away from where things are going to get trimmed. So nothing important should be near the edge of the page on the cover or on the interior. In fact, on the interior, it's better to even have a 1/2 inch safety zone there. But when you upload your file on KDP, you're going to open up this digital proof and it's going to let you see some red dashed lines and it's going to show you where that safe zone is. And you'll know like, okay, I've got all this stuff inside of that. Nothing's outside where it could potentially get cropped off if they make a little mistake, because sometimes they do. When they trim off, they make a mistake and they cut a little too close and you don't want your title cut off. The last thing in this section is page count, and some commercial printers want that to be divisible by 4. And you will see people who have been in the book publishing industry for a long time talk about book signatures, because books were bound in signatures or page collections of 4 or 8, and it had to do with how they printed them out and then cut them and then kind of stitched them all together into the book. But not all publishers ask for that anymore. In the age of commercial print on demand, there are a lot of them that don't need your book to be in a page in multiples of 4. So like your final page count does not have to be divisible by 4 or divisible by 8. With KDP, a lot of page counts are divisible by 2. And so essentially, if they think you need more blank pages, they will just add them. So you don't really need to worry about, unless you're working with children's books, that's different. Then they will give you specifics, like it needs to be 24 pages or 16 or whatever. But when you're working with a lot of nonfiction books, you do not have to worry about that. If they ask you specifically for the last page to be blank, they mean the very last page when you open the back cover. They don't mean the last 2 pages. They mean the very last thing you see inside of there. Especially on children's books, they will say that needs to be blank, and that's because they're going to put a barcode there that says where the book was printed. This is specific when you're doing print on demand and you're not ordering a bunch of offset printed books in huge quantity. So and that's why we don't put printed in the USA on the inside of the copyright, because they put a barcode in the back saying where it was printed. So if you're doing nonfiction and you open that up and that's the author bio right there, that's okay. They'll stick a blank page in there. You don't have to worry. They're not going to come back at you if you forgot the last blank page on those fiction and nonfiction full-length books. All right, a couple things before we wrap up. We want to test the file before the upload, so you want to just proof it really good. Look at the trim size, the bleed, the margins, and run it through a filter like Adobe. I use Adobe Acrobat. There's some filters you can do. It'll give you warnings if there's low resolution images. That's always good to check there. And then definitely get a proof copy. Now, you could print it at home, but you're not going to see the color of how it's going to look. It's just not going to be the same. And we don't have the ability to even print the covers at home because the full spread is bigger than my printer can do. So I go ahead and get the print proof. Don't rush it. Don't hit publish before you've seen that print proof. And that will help you catch some of those errors. So definitely do that. And then as you make modifications before you upload, have a good convention for how you name your files. I like to call them proofs or drafts in the file name until I get to that final one where I have flattened it or I have made sure the color profile is correct, and then I call it print. I don't call it final because I've seen people have 100 finals, a final. So it's never final. So either put the date or proof 1, proof 2, and then print 1, print 2, so that as you change it, if you have to make modifications, you know you're on the most current one, and then delete all the yucky ones that you're not going to keep on your device so that you don't get confused, because I've seen people upload the wrong one by accident. It can happen. It's really easy to happen. Those files are hard to find sometimes, so I get it. All right, so you're going to do that as you're testing it and making any modifications. And then in the final uploading or your final, the final steps that you're doing, if you're uploading to KDP or IngramSpark, you want to know their file requirements. So if it's a PDF, that's for your print books, and that's for your cover for the print book. And then for ebooks, it's going to be an EPUB file, and it's a JPEG cover. So it's different. Your cover looks like it's for screens when it's for an ebook, and it's a PDF for print when it's the print book. So they're a little bit different, and you just want to look at their file requirements. And then they will have an auto process when you upload the file. It's going to run through, and you might sit there for a few minutes and it says processing. It's going to look for some errors, and it will actually kick back to you right then and say either you had low resolution images or something was cut off the edge, and they will flag it and tell you where to find that, especially on KDP. They'll tell you what pages those errors are on, and you can work on that. So watch for that when you're doing the upload, and go ahead and fix it right then before you go any further. And then if you do get something kicked back, like IngramSpark is one of those where you go through that initial process, but then it goes to them, and then they take a look at it, and then they send you a proof back on a digital format. and they might send something back to you that says they rejected it or here's what's wrong with it. I want you to realize that there's some common reasons for getting rejected. Like maybe you accidentally clicked the wrong trim size. And this has happened on KDP with some clients where they've accidentally clicked 6x9, but they actually are uploading a 5.5x 8.5. And that's just a simple fix. Like, oh, oops, I picked the wrong size. Or they clicked that they forgot to click they have bleed. And there is bleed on the edges of the page. And so those are some common reasons, but also there are some other things like some things that you definitely need to fix in the file itself. And I want to encourage you not to assume it's the platform. Yes, they do glitch sometimes, but almost all of the time it's user error and not the platform. And so you want to work with them and take their advice and get the help you need from some people, but don't get angry at the platform because then they have to deal with things that they didn't do that. They're just trying to help you. So troubleshoot and then resubmit and just keep on moving. I have had all kinds of experience with some glitches like that are my responsibility as a designer. And we just fix them and then we get it done. So as we wrap up today, I got a little longer today, but I want you to remember this is a learning curve. But if you do it a few times, the process becomes easier. It can be very overwhelming, but it is very satisfying. I really enjoy doing this process. And if nothing else, as you're listening to this, if you decide this is absolutely not for you, like you don't have any desire to try to figure out some of that stuff, I encourage you to go ahead and make plans to hire somebody to help you because you're going to love your book processing, the whole publishing process a lot better. And you're going to have somebody who knows what they're doing. It's going to take less time. And then you'll be able to focus on some of the things that you like. So if nothing else, an episode like this can be confirmation for what you want to do and what you want to hire out. Now, I do want to tell you again that there's bonus content material for anybody who is a subscriber, a paid subscriber on Substack. And I have a book file preparation list. It just has the things I just talked about here in a checklist format for you to print. So go ahead and grab that. And that will be something you can tuck in all of the things that you're prepping as you're getting ready to publish your book. I want to thank you for listening today, and I wish you the best with your writing, and I'll be back next week with another episode.